Both negotiations and mediations are ways of managing divergences through discussion. But these discussions only take place if the parties perceive that a divergence exists between them. If a divergence exists objectively, but the parties do not perceive it as such, then we have no reason to start discussing. On the other hand, there are also cases where individuals enter into a discussion process to manage a divergence that they perceive, but which does not objectively exist. Let me give you some examples. Firstly, imagine that at home we only have one television set. My intention to watch the news may be undermined by my spouse's desire to watch his favorite series on another channel. We thus want things that are different and that seem incompatible. It is very easy to argue over this kind of divergence, and it is also very easy to spend long hours discussing who will have the privilege of watching his or her favorite program. Instead of arguing, we could also consider a long-term distribution of this television set. But perhaps the perceived incompatibility is less real than it seems at first sight. The news is on at 7:30 p.m., a time that doesn't really suit me. I come home from work late and I don't necessarily want to sit in front of my television set as soon as I step into the house. I can just as easily wait for my program to be replayed on the second channel half an hour later. In contrast, my partner likes walking after dark, so he can watch his series at 7:30 and escape just afterward to avoid having to deal with our daily ration of depressing news. Another example. This time I want to go on holiday with a friend. She wants to go to the mountains, whereas I only dream of fine sandy beaches and turquoise seas. A priori, our objectives are clearly divergent. But this perceived incompatibility between our objectives is again much less radical than it seems. If we look a little further, we will soon realize that there are many holiday destinations that allow us to combine the passion of the mountains with the idleness of the beaches, and that the incompatibility that separated us was in fact more subjective than objective. Last example. An argument breaks out between two sisters. There is only one orange left at home, and both sisters want it. This story is a classical example of two negotiation experts, Fisher and Ury. The authors just tell us the story of these two sisters who are fighting over an orange. The objectives pursued by the two sisters seem exactly the same. As the orange is a fixed and limited resources, they have to negotiate to separate it and to share it. In this type of situation, the option generally adopted by the parties is to cut the orange in half. Here again, the divergence between the two sisters appears to us to be very real. But if we continue reading Fisher and Ury's story, we realize that the conflict between the two sisters is more a matter of perception than an objective reality. Indeed, the authors tell us that in reality one of the two sisters wants to obtain the juice of the orange, while the other sister wants to obtain the zest to make a cake. Objectively, therefore, there is nothing to prevent the sisters from achieving their respective goals simultaneously. These objectives are not the same. They are very different. What produces the conflict is not the divergence, since there is no divergence, but the imprecision with which the two sisters formulate their objectives. By demanding the orange, rather than the zest or the juice, they come to perceive an incompatibility between them that objectively does not exist. In short, if discussion is a way of managing divergence, discussions are also sometimes help us to realize that divergences between us are less real than what we think. In this case, discussion is not about finding a solution to incompatible goals, but about understanding that the divergence exists only in our heads and that our goals are actually perfectly compatible.